Just how serious was that vaccine bungle in Queensland, where the 2 elderly people received 4 times the vaccine dosage?
Well, the dosage that they received, fortunately, was one that had been used in the trials earlier on. We try to give low vaccine dosages in the rollout just because that way we can make the vaccine spread much further. So for the layperson, you could say it's a little bit like taking 4 Panadol tablets instead of 1. We wouldn't expect that people would come to any harm from that. Medication errors, of course, are very common, and we need to not be too judgmental about it on an individual. We need to look at the whole system and see how is it that we had someone who hadn't completed the training on the front line at that point, and why was it not being checked? So we need to look at the whole system and make sure it's not repeated.
The latest studies in Israel are showing the Pfizer vaccine is protecting recipients about as well in real actual use as it did in the clinical trials. When do you expect we'll get more real-world data for the AstraZeneca vaccine? Because that's the one that most of us will end up with.
Well, we do have some encouraging data that's come out of Scotland this week, and that's real-world data, which is always more difficult to interpret because, of course, those trials aren't blinded. But we're looking forward in particular to a 30,000-strong trial that the Americans are doing, which should wrap up next week. And the week after, we'll see how AstraZeneca's been performing there. And, of course, unfortunately, a very high prevalence COVID environment. So we expect that will show a very useful, well-designed result there. And we'll have information certainly in the next couple of weeks around the effectiveness of these in the real world. And then the next question becomes, what do we do about the variants, in particular the one that's known as the South African variant, and looking at the effectiveness against that.
What is your message to people who are looking at the vaccine rollout, saying that the plan is to have essential workers all vaccinated by the end of April, and thinking, well, life's going to get back to normal soon? Qantas is talking about international flights resuming by October. Are we all getting a bit ahead of ourselves?
Well, look, I think it's fine to have hope as long as we're not assuming that we can just open up the borders until everyone's protected. And, of course, that includes our children. We don't yet have an approved vaccine for children, and although they don't get sick at as high a rate as adults do, it seems, there's certainly some who get very sick, and some children, unfortunately, have passed away from COVID disease. And we don't want to see those sort of outcomes in Australia. So until the kids are included, we won't be going back to normal life. And we also do need to deal with these kind of what we call the variants of concern, and how effective the vaccine is going to be of the mutations of the virus that are arising around the world. So I think it's safer to assume that for the foreseeable future, for at least the next 12 months, things in terms of international travel are not going to look anything like it has before this virus came along.
Recent polling seems to be telling us that there is an increase in vaccine hesitancy, particularly, it seems, among younger women. A lot of people seeming to look around Australia and thinking there's not a huge risk of them getting COVID. We know what the death rates are looking like, but when you look at long-term risks of COVID, should we be looking more at just the morbidity rate?
Yes, well, that's exactly right. Death is not the only bad thing that can happen if you get COVID, although it's obviously the worst, but there are long-term symptoms that some people are having many months down the track, having initially recovered from it. And I think that it's really important that people take the first opportunity they get to take the first vaccine they can get in order to just get as much protection as we can while we come to understand what the effects of long COVID are over the next 12 months, and while we come to understand what's going to happen with these mutant strains.
So we shouldn't be picky about what sort of vaccine we get. I mean, most of us aren't really going to have that choice, are we?
No, and I think if there are people who are hesitant because they want to wait for a particular vaccine, I would say there's no reason that you wouldn't be able to have a subsequent vaccine that we know of at the moment. That is a bit of an unknown because we still do need to get the data in, but all indications seem to be that if you take the first vaccine that comes along, the government will need to change course with the selection of vaccines and with the way they roll it out if we do see variants arising. And certainly our government has shown every indication that they want the minimum possible COVID disease, and so they will need to be agile and adapt to the vaccine program as we go along if it seems as though the virus is moving ahead of us or evading the vaccines that we currently have.
You've been a big advocate for an overhaul of the quarantine hotel system. Obviously in Perth, the lockdown was caused by the virus escaping from hotel quarantine. We've seen that right around the country. Does the vaccine rollout make that a bit of a moot point?
No, because of course people who are vaccinated can still spread the disease. So the frontline workers who are getting the Pfizer vaccine could still catch an infection in hotel quarantine and then pass it on to their family and on out into the community. Even though they don't get very sick themselves. In fact, they may, the vaccine may reduce the amount of virus they can spread, but we don't know the answer to that question yet. So we still need professional quarantine facilities like they see in Howard Springs, like we're talking about developing in Victoria. We need to have ventilation, we need to have proper PPE, and those things haven't been provided to frontline workers. It's grossly negligent that the government are not moving very fast to provide proper ventilation within all buildings and to encourage others to do the same, and to provide airborne level PPE for frontline staff. Now that it is quite clear, we know that this can be, on occasions, an airborne disease. And so I don't know where the reluctance still lies within government and within government experts. But if anybody's thinking that, oh, we've got the vaccine now, so we don't need to worry about protecting workers, that's a fantasy. Not only can they still spread the disease once vaccinated, but we don't know whether our vaccines are going to be effective against all variants coming along over the next 12 months. We have a window to prepare. Let's do it properly.